In the far reaches of the galaxy, there was a race known as the Tyran, an ancient and powerful species. For centuries, they had controlled the stars, building an empire that stretched across countless worlds. Their technology was unmatched, their armies unstoppable. Yet there was one thing even the Tyran feared: the humans. Long ago, humans had been a scattered, weak species, living on a small planet they called Earth. But there was something in their potential that the Tyran could never ignore. The humans had discovered something the Tyran had not: an ability to learn, adapt, and innovate at a rate that was almost impossible to comprehend. A race once destined for oblivion was now capable of creating technologies that could challenge the very foundation of the Tyran Empire. Fearing what they might become, the Tyran had made a decision that would echo through the ages. They placed humanity into a deep stasis sleep, hiding them away in secret, scattered across the galaxy. The humans were not killed, not enslaved, but forgotten. For centuries, the Tyran kept them hidden, making sure no one disturbed the humans' sleep, knowing that if they ever woke, the balance of power would shift. But as the centuries passed, the Tyran's empire began to weaken. Wars between factions within the empire grew more frequent. Resources dwindled, and their once great military forces grew disorganized. The Tyran elders, desperate to preserve their crumbling rule, began to look for ways to strengthen their hold on the galaxy. They turned to the humans, believing they could use them as tools to restore their empire. But they had forgotten something crucial, the one rule they had always followed: don't wake the humans. The Tyran Council, led by their eldest and most powerful members, debated the decision. There were whispers of the ancient rule, but they believed that time had passed and the humans would be no threat. The elders argued that humanity, once scattered and weak, had no place in the grand scheme of the galaxy anymore. They could be controlled, manipulated. Perhaps with the right leadership, the humans could serve the Tyran as loyal subjects, bringing a fresh strength to their dying empire. Thus, with a cold and calculated decision, the Tyran activated the stasis chambers that held the humans. They did not know exactly what would happen, but they believed they could control the awakening. A small group of humans, carefully chosen from the thousands who had been in stasis, were brought out into the light of a new galaxy. The first humans to awaken were confused and disoriented. They were not on Earth, not in their familiar homes. The air smelled different, the sky above them foreign. They saw towering ships, strange landscapes, and strange, powerful beings. These were not the peaceful days they had once known. These were the Tyran, tall, imposing, with glowing eyes that spoke of centuries of power. They had been woken, not as saviors, but as experiments. To the Tyran, these humans were nothing more than a resource, something to manipulate and control. First, the humans had no idea what had happened. They were placed in vast cities surrounded by technology they could not understand. The Tyran told them they were to help rebuild the empire, that they would be given resources and technology to help guide them into the future. But the humans, while confused, began to piece together fragments of their past. They started to remember the histories, the stories passed down through the generations, the great wars fought, the lost civilizations, and the ancient forces that had once threatened the Tyran Empire. And as they learned, something else began to happen. The humans remembered their potential, the potential the Tyran had feared. They saw the broken machines, the rotting structures of the empire, and they saw opportunity. The Tyran had underestimated them. The humans were not weak, nor would they ever be again. Elias was one of the first to realize the truth. He had been a leader in his past life back on Earth, before the stasis had claimed him. He had once been a soldier, a thinker, a strategist. He quickly saw that the humans were not helpless, far from it. The Tyran had made a grave mistake in bringing them out of stasis. The humans were ready for a fight. It began in the small things. At first, there was resistance in the form of whispers, humans in secret speaking of the oppression they had lived under for centuries, even in stasis. They spoke of the Tyran's cruelty, their manipulation, and the lies they had been told. Then the first small acts of rebellion began. The Tyran had brought them into the heart of their empire, but in doing so, they had given them access to knowledge they had not intended for them to find. Elias, along with a small group of other humans, began to study the technology of the Tyran. They hacked into the systems, learned how the weapons worked, how the ships flew, how the Tyran's own power grid could be manipulated. They started sabotaging equipment, creating small disruptions that went unnoticed at first. But those small disruptions grew larger. Soon, entire sectors of the Tyran Empire began to fall into chaos as the humans used their newfound knowledge to fight back. The Tyran, initially oblivious to the humans' growing rebellion, began to take notice. But by then it was too late. The humans had tasted the power of resistance. They had seen what they could do when they were united, when they fought together. They were no longer the weak, scattered humans they had been. They had awakened to their true potential, and they would not go back to the way things were. The Tyran had woken the humans, and now the consequences of that decision were about to unfold. The humans who had once been lost in the deep sleep of stasis were now wide awake. The world they found themselves in was nothing like the Earth they had left behind. Instead of peaceful blue skies and green fields, they saw towering metal structures that seemed to reach the heavens. Strange ships floated in the air, their engines humming with power. The humans, disoriented and confused, were thrown into a world that felt like a dream. But the Tyran weren't interested in their confusion. They had brought them here for a reason. At first, the humans believed they were part of some grand experiment, but quickly, they realized the truth. The Tyran were no saviors. They had not brought the humans out of stasis to help them, but to use them. The humans were meant to be tools, nothing more. The Tyran believed their empire could be restored with the help of these newly awakened humans, who were strong, clever, and adaptable. The Tyran thought they could control the humans, direct them as they saw fit, but they were wrong. In the vast city where they were held, humans began to look at each other with a sense of unity that had been absent when they had first awoken. It didn't take long for them to realize that they weren't just a handful of survivors. They were a force. The Tyran had made a terrible mistake. They had awoken a sleeping giant. Elias, the natural leader among the humans, was the first to speak out. He had once been a commander back on Earth before everything had changed. His mind was sharp, his instincts strong. He had quickly understood that the Tyran were not gods, as they seemed to think. They were just another species, one that had fallen into arrogance and complacency. The humans were no longer the weak race the Tyran had kept hidden for so long. They were strong, they were brilliant, and they were many. We cannot allow them to control us, Elias said one evening, speaking to a small group of trusted humans who had gathered secretly. We are not their tools. We are not their slaves. We are the future of this galaxy. The group listened closely. They knew the risks of rebellion, but they also knew that their lives had already been stolen from them once. They were not going to let the Tyran control them any longer. The humans began to plan, gathering resources and knowledge from the vast cities they were placed in. It wasn't easy. The Tyran had more advanced technology than they could ever have imagined, but they were not invincible. The humans had something the Tyran did not: ingenuity. At first, their actions were small. They hacked into the Tyran's systems, learning their weaknesses. They studied the ships, the weapons, and the technology that surrounded them. Little by little, they began to strike. They sabotaged Tyran equipment, caused small disruptions in the Empire's infrastructure. At first, the Tyran didn't notice. Their empire was vast, and one small sabotage seemed insignificant. But the humans were growing bolder, and their attacks more frequent. The first major victory came when a group of humans managed to take control of a Tyran ship. The ship, a massive vessel capable of destroying entire cities, had been sent on a routine patrol, but the humans on board, using their newfound knowledge of Tyran technology, managed to disable the ship's weapons and navigation systems. They then turned the ship around and sent it crashing into one of the Tyran's resource depots. The explosion was massive, and it sent shockwaves through the Empire. The Tyran were stunned. They had never expected the humans to be capable of such a thing. To them, the humans had always been a weak, insignificant species. But now, the humans had shown that they could fight back. They had demonstrated that they were more than just passive victims. They were warriors in their own right. Elias and his group watched the destruction from a safe distance, their hearts pounding with excitement. This was only the beginning. The Tyrant had made a terrible mistake. They had underestimated the humans, and now, it was time to show the galaxy what they were capable of. The Tyran will learn what happens when they mess with humanity, Elias said, his voice filled with determination. The human rebellion began to spread like wildfire. What had started as small isolated acts of defiance grew into something much larger. Across the galaxy, humans began to rise up. They freed their fellow humans from the Tyrant's control, and they liberated entire planets from the Tyrant's grasp. As they did, they gained new allies, other races who had suffered under the Tyrant's rule. These species, once afraid to speak out against the Empire, now saw the humans as their hope for freedom. They joined the rebellion, offering their strength, their technology, and their numbers. But the Tyrant were not blind. They quickly realized that their precious empire was beginning to crumble. They sent their elite soldiers, the Tyrant commandos, to deal with the human threat. These soldiers were fierce, trained in the most advanced forms of combat. But even they were not prepared for what the humans could do. The humans were not afraid. They fought with the passion of a species that had been denied its place in the galaxy for far too long. The Tyrant thought they could crush the humans with sheer force, but they had forgotten one thing. Humans were not like other species. They were survivors. And when cornered, they became something more, something unstoppable. As the rebellion grew, so did the humans' understanding of their own power. They had been awakened not just to fight, but to rebuild. They began to uncover ancient technologies, ones that the Tyran had forgotten or lost over the centuries. These technologies were beyond the Tyrant's understanding. The humans had not just been in stasis, they had been asleep, waiting for the right moment to rise again, and now that moment had come. The Tyran Empire had never seen anything like the growing human resistance. What had begun as small acts of sabotage now spread across the galaxy, causing chaos in the once orderly empire. The humans, driven by their desire for freedom, were taking the fight to the Tyrant with a passion the Empire had not anticipated. Elias stood at the helm of a makeshift fleet, staring out at the vastness of space. His heart raced with excitement and fear. The rebellion had grown beyond anything he had imagined. The humans were no longer scattered and disoriented. They were united in a single cause, to take down the Tyran and reclaim their place in the galaxy. Their first major victory had come when they took control of a Tyran warship, the Tyrannus, and used it to attack one of the Empire's largest supply depots. The explosion had sent shockwaves through the Tyran command. But this was only the beginning. The humans now had a fleet of their own, a mixture of stolen Tyran ships and those built by humans using their newly learned technologies. "This is it," Elias said, his voice calm but filled with determination. "We strike now while they're still reeling from the last blow. We hit them where it hurts." His crew, a mix of humans and their new alien allies, nodded in agreement. They had come a long way since their first act of rebellion, and the fear that had once held them back had disappeared. Now they were ready for war. Elias's plan was simple. They would strike at the heart of the Tyran Empire, the capital planet, Drethan. If they could take Drethan, they could deal a fatal blow to the Tyran's ability to wage war. The Tyran had grown complacent, believing that their homeworld was safe, protected by layers of defense that no one could break through. But the humans had learned to think differently. They had no fear of the impossible. The fleet set off, 100 ships strong, each one brimming with weapons, technology, and hope. As they neared the Tyran capital, the Tyran fleet came into view. The Tyran, now aware of the threat the humans posed, had gathered their best forces to defend their homeworld. Their ships, sleek and powerful, formed a ring of defense around Drethan, and their weapons powered up, ready to strike. Elias took a deep breath, watching the enemy fleet grow larger on the screen. The odds were against them. The Tyran outnumbered them and their ships were more advanced. But Elias didn't hesitate. The humans had learned to fight smarter, not harder. They had studied the Tyran's weaknesses, exploited their overconfidence, and learned how to use their technology against them. "Prepare for battle," Elias commanded, his voice steady. "Target the weakest points. Focus on disabling their weapons first. We don't need to destroy them all, just enough to get to Drethan." The humans launched their attack with precision, their ships darting in and out of the Tyran formation like shadows. They targeted the Tyran ships' engines, disabling them one by one. The Tyran were quick to retaliate, their ships firing beams of energy that cut through space like lightning. But the humans, moving with surprising agility, avoided, the blasts taking down ship after ship. In the chaos of battle, something strange happened. The Tyran fleet, once known for its strength and unity, began to falter. The humans were pushing them back, using their newfound tactics to outmaneuver the enemy. Elias watched as the Tyran ships, once so confident, began to scatter. Their control was slipping. "Keep it up. Don't let them regroup," Elias shouted. The humans, fighting with everything they had, pressed forward. They had come to this point not just for victory, but for something more, for the future of their people, for the freedom they had been denied for so long. As the last Tyran ship fell, Elias's fleet made its way to Drethan. The planet loomed ahead, its surface covered by vast cities, each one a symbol of the Tyran's dominance. But now, it was a target. Elias knew that the real battle was not in space. It was on the surface of Drethan itself. The humans landed on the planet's surface, their fleet dropping down from the skies like a storm. The Tyran, unprepared for an invasion so close to home, scrambled to defend their cities. But the humans, fueled by years of oppression, fought with a fury that the Tyran had never seen before. The first battle was fought in the streets of Drethan's capital city. Humans, armed with stolen Tyran weapons and their own improvised gear, fought tooth and nail against the Tyran soldiers. The battle was brutal, with both sides suffering heavy losses. But the humans were relentless. They didn't stop. They didn't give up. They fought for their freedom, and that made them stronger than the Tyran ever realized. Elias led the charge, his soldiers following him with unwavering loyalty. They stormed the central command building of Drethan, where the Tyran leaders had gathered. The building was heavily guarded, but the humans had learned how to move undetected, how to take down their enemies without alerting the rest of the city. As they infiltrated the command center, Elias found himself face to face with the Tyran commander, a tall, imposing figure who had once been known as the leader of the Empire's most elite forces. The Tyran commander, who had watched the humans fight from afar, was finally realizing that the Empire he had served for so long was crumbling. "You've come far, human," the Tyran commander said, his voice cold and proud. "But you can't defeat an empire that's been in power for millennia." Elias stood tall, meeting the commander's gaze. "You're wrong. The empire has already fallen. It's just a matter of time before you see it for yourself." With those words, Elias and his team launched their final assault. The Tyran commander fought fiercely, but the humans were driven by something he couldn't understand, a fire that would not be extinguished. And in the end, it was the humans who stood victorious. As the Tyran commander fell, Elias knew that this was only the beginning. They had struck a mighty blow to the heart of the Empire, but there was still much to be done. The galaxy was vast, and many Tyrans still remained. But the humans had proven one thing above all: they would no longer be slaves. They would no longer live in fear. The rebellion had truly begun. The victory on Drethan was a turning point. The humans had achieved the unimaginable, breaking through the defenses of the Tyran capital and striking a blow to the heart of the Empire. But as the humans celebrated their triumph, they knew the war was far from over. The Tyran were not a species to be defeated easily. They were ancient, powerful, and ruthless. The humans had won one battle, but the war had only just begun. The Tyran, shaken by the loss of Drethan, quickly regrouped. They could not afford to let this rebellion spread. The empire, once vast and untouchable, was now in danger of crumbling. The Tyran leaders, desperate to hold on to their control, launched a counteroffensive. Their forces, though fewer in number, were still formidable. Their ships were powerful, and their soldiers were ruthless. The humans had made a serious enemy, and the Tyran would stop at nothing to destroy them. Elias stood in the command room of his flagship, looking at the holo map that displayed the movements of the Tyran fleet. It was vast, stretching across the galaxy like a shadow. The Tyran were not going to let go of their empire without a fight. But Elias wasn't scared. He had seen what the humans were capable of, and he knew they were not going to give up. They had come too far. They won't stop coming, Elias said, his voice calm but firm. They'll send everything they have at us. We need to strike. First. His officers nodded in agreement. The humans were outnumbered, but they had something the Tyran didn't, an unbreakable will to fight for their freedom. Elias had always believed that the humans could overcome any obstacle if they stood together, and now more than ever, that belief was being tested. The humans launched their next attack with precision. Their target was a Tyran shipyard located in the outer reaches of the galaxy. This shipyard was crucial to the Tyrans' war effort, as it produced the ships and weapons they needed to maintain their empire. If the humans could destroy it, it would cripple the Tyrans' ability to wage war. Elias and his fleet, though smaller, had the advantage of surprise. The fleet moved swiftly, staying out of range of the Tyrans' larger fleets. They reached the shipyard without detection and quickly began their attack. The Tyran caught off. Guards scrambled to defend their station, but the humans had come prepared. Using the technology they had stolen from the Tyran and their own ingenuity, they launched a series of devastating strikes on the shipyard's defense systems. The Tyran retaliated quickly, sending wave after wave of ships to defend the station. The battle was fierce, with both sides suffering heavy losses. The humans fought valiantly, using hit-and-run tactics to outmaneuver the Tyran ships. They disabled weapon systems, destroyed fighter jets, and took down shields. Each strike brought them closer to their goal. "We're almost there," Elias shouted as his ship took a direct hit from a Tyran destroyer. The impact rattled the entire vessel, but it held steady. "Keep pushing forward. We have to destroy that shipyard." The humans pressed on, their resolve unshaken. They knew this battle would be hard, but they had no choice. If they lost this fight, the Tyran would be able to rebuild and strike back even harder. Elias and his fleet gave everything they had. Finally, after hours of intense fighting, the shipyard was destroyed. The explosion was massive, sending debris and wreckage scattering into space. The Tyran had suffered another major blow, but the cost was high. The humans had lost several ships in the battle, and many soldiers had died. Elias stood on the bridge of his ship, staring at the wreckage floating in space. The victory felt hollow. The Tyran would not take this loss lightly. They would come after the humans with everything they had left. "We've won this battle," Elias said, his voice filled with both pride and sorrow. "But the war isn't over. The Tyran will come for us, and they will be angry." His officers nodded grimly. They had won, but they knew what was coming next. As the humans regrouped and began to lick their wounds, the Tyran launched their retaliation. The first target was a small human colony on the edge of the galaxy. The Tyran, bent on sending a message, attacked without mercy. The colony was completely destroyed in a matter of hours. It was a brutal reminder of the power the Tyran still wielded. They were not finished, and they would not go quietly into the night. Elias watched the destruction from his ship, his heart heavy with grief. The Tyran had taken innocent lives, and there was nothing he could do to stop it. His people were paying the price for their rebellion, but he knew they couldn't stop now. They had come too far, and they had already lost too much. The Tyran were trying to break their spirit, but Elias refused to let them. "We will rebuild," he said firmly. "This will not be in vain. We will fight back. We will make them pay for what they've done." And so the humans prepared for the next phase of the war. They would not let the Tyran's attack on the colony be their final defeat. They would rise again, stronger than ever. But Elias knew the war would not be won with just weapons and strategy. It would be won with the hearts and minds of those who fought. The Tyrann were powerful, yes, but they had never understood the power of a people who had been pushed to the brink. The humans would never stop fighting because they had a purpose that the Tyrann could never take away. As the humans gathered their forces for the next battle, Elias stood tall, ready to face whatever the Tyrann threw at them. He had made a promise to his people, and he would keep it. The Tyrann would not win, not now, not ever. The sky above the ruined colony was dark. Smoke rose from the burning buildings, and the ground was covered in ash. The Tyrann had left nothing behind. No survivors, no homes, not even a single working machine. It was their warning to the humans. You may fight us, but you will suffer. Elias stood on the edge of the wreckage, silent. He wore no helmet now. He wanted to breathe the air, dirty and filled with sorrow. This place had once been full of life, families, children, laughter. Now it was only silence. Beside him stood Lyra, a young engineer from Earth who had helped design many of the Resistance's new weapons. Her hands were dirty with soot. Her face was pale. They didn't even give them a chance, she whispered. No, Elias said, eyes fixed on the horizon. That's the Tyrann way. They think fear will stop us. They still don't understand. The humans buried what they could. Small graves were marked with metal plates, names scratched in by hand. There weren't enough stones for all the dead. Some names would remain lost, but each one lit a fire inside Elias. That night, Elias gathered the rebellion's leaders inside the warship Hopefire, the last great ship stolen from the Tyrann fleet. The meeting room was dim, lit by a single blue, light that flickered with every shake of the ship. They want us to give up, Elias said, his voice calm but sharp. They think they can burn our future. They think we'll kneel. General Maker, a former Tyrann who had defected to the humans, stood up. He had scars across his face from the early days of the war. They are getting desperate, Maker said. They burned the colony not because they're strong, but because they are losing. They needed to show strength. They showed weakness, Lyra added. They attacked civilians. That's not war, that's fear. Elias nodded. Then we show them something they've never seen before. We don't strike a single base. We don't target one city. We hit 5 at the same time. The room went silent. Coordinated attacks on 5 Tyrann worlds? It sounded impossible. We don't have the numbers, said Captain Alrin, a pilot who had flown through a dozen battles and nearly died twice. We don't need numbers, Elias replied. We need speed, timing, surprise. He pressed a button on the table. A map lit up, 5 Tyrann worlds glowing red. These are not just cities. They are factories, training centers, command stations. If we hit them all in one night, the Empire will stumble. The plan was risky, too risky, but the humans agreed. After the colony massacre, they wanted to strike back, not just to fight, but to show the galaxy that humanity would never be broken. Again. The next few days were filled with work. Fleets were split. Weapons were loaded. Messages were sent across light years to hidden allies. Some humans, others from enslaved alien worlds who had quietly joined the resistance. Elias chose the hardest target for himself, Torvak, a heavily guarded planet where the Tyrann trained their elite soldiers. It was known as the Spine because it supported the Empire's ground armies. The Hopefire arrived near Torvak in the early hours of its planetary rotation. The defense system hadn't been updated in months. The Tyrann believed no one would dare strike it, but Elias dared. The attack began from orbit. Precision bombs destroyed communication towers in seconds. The city below was silent, confused. Then came the dropships, carrying teams of human fighters trained for one mission: disable, destroy, disappear. Elias led the first squad through the northern gate. Lasers flashed. Walls crumbled. The Tyrann elite were strong, but unprepared. They had trained for controlled battles, not chaos. The humans brought chaos like a storm. Inside the main command tower, Elias planted a bomb on the core reactor. He paused, just for a moment. looking at the Tyran flag that hung from the ceiling. A symbol of control. A symbol of silence. He pulled the switch. The tower exploded behind him as his team fled to the extraction point. The ground shook. Smoke covered the city. At the same time, across the galaxy, 4 more cities fell. Explosions lit up the sky over factories. Rebel ships danced through enemy fire and vanished before the Tyran could react. The message was clear. The humans are everywhere. Back aboard Hopefire, Elias sat in the dark control room, staring at the reports coming in. All 5 strikes had succeeded. The human losses were light. The Tyran casualties were heavy, but something else caught his eye. A transmission. Weak, broken, but real. It was from a place called the Vault. Lyra entered and saw the signal. "What is it?" Elias turned. "A secret facility. One the Tyran never wanted anyone to find. What's inside?" He looked at her and answered in a quiet voice. "More humans, still asleep." Lyra's eyes widened. "You mean thousands, maybe more, hidden for centuries?" Elias stared at the stars. The war wasn't over. But they were no longer just survivors. They were builders of a future the galaxy had forgotten. "We're going to wake them," Elias said. "And then?" Lyra asked. He smiled for the first time in days. "Then we take back everything." The rebellion had reached a tipping point. The humans, once hidden away in stasis, now filled the galaxy with their fires of revolt. They had struck hard, crippling the Tyran with their surprise attacks, and each victory had brought them closer to their ultimate goal, freedom. But the greatest secret of all had just been revealed. There were still thousands of humans in stasis, stored away in the secret Tyran facility known as the Vault. Now Elias knew that the war had entered its final stage. The Hopefire moved quickly. Through the galaxy, a shadow against the stars, carrying with it a fleet of ships all converging on the Vault. They had one objective: to awaken the sleeping humans and bring them into the fight. But there were dangers. The Tyran would not let this secret go unpunished. "The Vault is deep inside Tyran territory," Elias said, standing in the command center of Hopefire. His voice was steady but filled with a sense of urgency. "The Tyran will know we're coming. They'll be waiting for us." Lyra, ever the engineer, leaned over the console, typing quickly. "We've already hacked into their systems. I can help disable their defenses for a short time. But once we're inside the Vault, it'll be on us to get those humans out safely." "We'll need a plan," Elias said, turning to General Maker, who was now more of an ally than a former enemy. "How do we get in and out without getting caught?" Maker stood tall, his hands folded behind his back. "The Tyran will have set up defenses around the Vault, but their arrogance has blinded them. They think they've hidden it well, but they don't expect a fight from inside their own ranks." Elias nodded, trusting Maker's experience. The Tyran had underestimated humanity before. They would do so again. The mission was clear. A small strike team would infiltrate the Vault, disable the defenses, and awaken the humans. The rest of the fleet would provide cover, ensuring that no Tyran forces could stop them once the operation began. The fleet moved quietly, making their way into Tyran-controlled space. Every sensor was on high alert. The closer they got to the Vault, the more dangerous their mission became. Every ship was ready for the worst, but Elias had seen the worst and he knew what needed to be done. This was their final chance to end the war. As the Hopefire reached the Vault's orbit, Elias stood before his team, his voice firm and calm. "Once we land, we move fast. We have one chance to do this right. The lives of every human in stasis depend on us. This is for the future." The team gathered around him, nodding silently. They were ready. The Vault was hidden deep inside a massive asteroid field. The Tyran had built it in a place few would dare to venture, but the humans had studied their movements, learned their patterns. They knew where to strike. The Hopefire broke through the asteroid field, moving with precision. The Tyran ships patrolled the perimeter, unaware of the small fleet moving toward the Vault. Lyra had done her work. disabling the defenses just long enough for the humans to slip past, unnoticed. But that window would not stay open for long. Elias and his team, fully geared and ready, boarded their dropships. The world outside the vault was nothing but darkness and cold, but inside, the secret lay waiting. The dropships landed on the surface of the asteroid, and the team moved swiftly, disappearing into the shadows of the vault's entrance. Inside, the vault was a massive complex, rows upon rows of stasis chambers stretched out in every direction. The humans in stasis lay still, their faces peaceful, unaware of the war raging around them. They had been asleep for so long. Too long. "We're running out of time," Elias said, his voice echoing in the empty halls. "Lyra, can you unlock the stasis chambers?" Lyra nodded. "I've got it, just give me a few seconds." She worked quickly, her fingers flying over the control panel. The stasis chambers hummed to life, one by one. The first chamber opened, and a young woman stepped out. She looked confused, her eyes wide as she took in her new surroundings. "What's happening?" she asked, her voice trembling. "You're free," Elias said softly. "You've been asleep for a long time. The Tyrant have kept you in stasis, but we're here now. We're taking you home." She nodded slowly, still processing the information. But before she could say anything more, the next chamber opened, and then another and another. One by one, the humans began to wake up. Some were older, some younger, but all had the same expression of confusion and fear. They had been pulled from one world into another, and now they were thrown into the heart of a war. "Welcome back," Elias said as he helped another human out of the chamber. "We're going to need your help. The Tyrann won't stop until we're all gone." The newly awakened humans nodded, their resolve hardening. They had been asleep for so long, but now they were awake, and they were not going to lie down again. But the Tyrann were coming. The ship alarms blared as the first Tyrann forces arrived. They had been tracking the humans for days, and now they were here to stop them. "It's now or never," Maker shouted. "Get to the extraction point. We don't have much time." The humans moved quickly, rallying around Elias and Maker. The vault was becoming a battlefield, the sounds of lasers and explosions echoing through the halls. But the humans fought back with a fury unlike anything the Tyrann had ever seen. They fought for their freedom, for their families, for a future that had been stolen from them. As they reached the extraction point, Elias turned to the last group of humans still emerging from stasis. He knew they had to leave, now. The Hopefire was waiting, but the Tyrann were closing in fast. With a final look at the vault, Elias gave the order, "Let's go." The humans climbed into their ships, and the fleet blasted off into space, leaving behind the asteroid field and the vault. The Tyrann forces pursued, but they were too late. The humans had won. The last of the sleeping humans were now awake, ready to join the fight. As the ship sped away, Elias stood on the bridge of Hopefire, staring out at the stars. The Tyrann had underestimated them. They had tried to keep the humans hidden, kept them in stasis, and kept them down. But they had failed. The rebellion was no longer just a fight for survival. It was a fight for a new future. A future where the Tyrann no longer ruled. A future where the humans, who had once been lost and forgotten, would now shape their own destiny. And as the humans made their escape, Elias knew one thing for certain. The Tyrann Empire was finished.